Hey, good evening, everybody. It is 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and you are here with us on Althing Considered. Tonight on Althing Considered, we will have a conversation with the Troth Military Liaison, game designer, author, Heathen Philosopher, U.S. Army veteran, and Kat Heath's husband, Josh Heath. We're going to get into, as is in our style, we're not just going to talk about the past and what might have been, but about how those stories affect us today. So that's what we're going to get into this evening on All Things Considered. And also, we have with us tonight our PR director, Piper Perry. Hi, Piper.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. All right, so Josh, thank you for coming in. Josh and I have known each other for a really long time, as I recall. Back when Josh didn't have so much gray in his beard.
Didn't have a beard, I think, when we first
have
met.
A beard. No. You actually had you had a little hair up top.
Mm-hmm.
You had hair up top. You had no beard. And before you had become a parent, I think you and Kat had just recently got married. Like it was a long time ago. Oh boy, didn't think so. It is good to see you as always, and so we're just going to spend the first, I think, 15 to 20 minutes just talking about your wife, Kat.
Yeah,
what she's doing, what she's writing, probably for Nano. She wrote for NaNoWriMo, I'm sure.
She's at 80,000 words on that book already.
Oh wow!
It's almost done. I think she's got 2 scenes left. She said.
And what is this book about?
This is a continuation of her. Yeah, I'm just going to say werewolves and dead people.
Yeah.
Yes, sounds great. I cannot wait to see the cover design of this book. And Kat Heath is again another great Heathen author, and Josh also an author and game designer in his own right. How many games have you designed at this point, Josh?
So my name is in about 150, 160 books of various sorts. As a designer credit, writer credit, I've probably in about 80, maybe 90 of those particular books. So lots of game design stuff.
That is incredible. And also you are an author too, as well. Isn't it? You actually wrote a book, I believe, about your experiences in the military. Isn't that right?
I did. I wrote a memoir called Deployed and Back Again, A Fobbit's Tale, which is, I still praise myself for that title. I think it's amazing.
That's very clever. Wait, what's a FOB?
A FOB is a forward operating base. It's the type of bases you'll find in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
And Josh knows these things because, as I said before, you are a U.S. Army veteran. Is that not right?
That's right.
How many years did you serve in the military?
So I was on active duty for 5.5 years, and then I was in the reserves doing actively reservy things for 13 more months. So it comes out to a very weird time number, and I usually just round it to 7 years, but it's more like 7 years and 5 months and 3 days or something ridiculous like that. And people always get confused because usually military service has very even numbers, and mine just didn't for various reasons.
Yeah, right on. And that was part of what we wanted to discuss today. Was actually partly your veterans experience and the experience that you encounter since you are a military liaison. You talk to veterans a lot, and you probably and you also were the founder with Kat of the Open Halls Project. And did you want to talk a little bit about what Open Halls did?
Yeah, the original goal of the Open Halls Project was getting veterans connected to communities when they moved from place to place, right? Heathens, particularly in the military, when we started it, 2009-ish, there was no way of really finding a new group of heathens when you move from base to base, right? So we focused on that, and then we got heavily focused on this project to get our faith added to the religious preference list. Which is no longer called that now. It's now called the Faith and Religious something or other list. It's a much cooler name, whatever it is. And we push to get Ausatru and Heathenry added. Incidentally, the Troth got added because of an interesting paperwork quirk. So there are 6 members of the Troth who have that listed.
Troth is the religion.
Yes, as their religion on their official military records. When I saw that, I was really impressed. So there are people that are dedicated to the Troth enough to be like, yes.
That is my
That's
look,
my religion.
or like they either are devoted enough to the Troth, or they really messed up on the paperwork.
Possible.
but either way, you know, we're not just an organization, people. We are an official religion registered with the United States military. The Troth is, which
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah.
And thank you for all that stuff that you guys have done. I remember when you guys had founded that and opened it, it was such a cool idea. And I think you guys really did a lot of good in the years that you guys were operating.
I like to think so. I think what's awesome is there are so many groups that have stepped up afterward to try to fill that space, right? And it's good that it's not just one, right? It's good that there are multiple groups saying, hey, how can we do this? How can we do this better, right? There's a group called the Heathen American Veterans of America, or HAVA. They are largely based in Korea, of all things, but they are doing good things. There's a group called the American, oh man, these guys, I love them, and I can never remember their name, so I'm going to have to look it up. But there are a few of these different groups of heathen military organizations that have sprung up, and they're working together, right? They're working with us in the Troth, and they're working together. So even while they're doing separate things, I think we're all driving towards the same goals, and that's all good stuff. And Alliance of Military Heathens is the one I was thinking.
Alliance of Military Heathens, and that actually transitioned us into not just the state of Veterans Affairs, but even military affairs overall with regards to and I think Veterans Affairs is going to be our specific focus, just because of the stories that we tell ourselves about this warrior religion, and that's why one of the reasons why we brought on Josh is because he's a soldier. he knows quite a bit about warrior myths, not just the warrior myths that come from Old Norse, but also the kind of the warrior myths that we have here at home in the United States as well. So quite familiar with that too. And one of the things I wanted to ask about was like, what's the state in your experience of Veterans Affairs for heathens specifically? Now, I know this might be just a quick answer of, Ben, it's great. Everything goes wonderfully. Every veteran I talk to can't say enough about how easily they access their benefits. But you know, try and elaborate a little bit on just how good it is.
I like the way you're phrasing it, and I hate to dash the hopes of it being amazing. It's could be a lot worse, I think, than it is right now. I actually think VA, the Veterans Affairs Department, is doing better than it has in decades past, right? It's not perfect. There are veterans slipping through the cracks all the time, but there are a lot of things being done within the organization to support veterans better in general. Now, the VA does not currently recognize heathenry of any sort as a religious denomination within Veterans Affairs, right? That lack of official recognition doesn't harm anyone per se, but it certainly doesn't help, right? Because it's going to be harder to get a clergy member of the Troth or any other heathen clergy in if a veteran needed them while they were in a VA hospital or something like that. The VA is not quite as strict as the Department of Defense in what they require for people that come from a particular religious organization. But it is something at some point that I have been thinking about, that others have been talking about. How do we get the VA to say heathenry is a religion, to make sure that veteran heathens are being recognized, protected, and supported? Because there are a lot of us, right? There's a larger number of heathen veterans than I think people are aware of.
Yeah, that is kind of, it's a stunning number of in that particular population, right? Like there's not a large number of heathens, I think, overall, but the overrepresentation of heathens within the military is it's something to talk to. And it was something we actually talked to, I believe, with some of our partners at the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy.
That's right.
There are friends there. Our friend Ray, he recognized it as well, that there's and he is he's a minister, or is he? But he's the liaison there, and he recognized it too. He saw, like, wow, there's a lot of people in this who is subscribed to this particular heathen faith, and he actually reached out to. Did he reach out to you, or reached out to? Could you describe that relationship a little bit more? It's actually a very exciting one.
Yeah. The International Center for Religion Diplomacy started a domestic focused program in November of last year, and I, being a person who is in the peace building spaces, saw it and thought, that's super cool. I'm just going to email these folks and say, what you're doing is awesome. Hey, I'm part of this really weird religious organization and community. We have a problem, right? We have a problem with people being radicalized and extremists within our community. Can you help us? And they were like, we have no idea what you're talking about. We're super excited to learn. And Ray in particular has just learned a lot about us in the time that I've known him, in the last year that I've known him, and really been an amazing advocate for supporting us in creating programs to combat extremism within the heathen community, and ensure that we are building a better America overall, which is one of their major targets, is how can we reduce extremism within the United States so that things are better for people, right? It sounds a little trite, but
no, and this segues really nicely into the question about the stories that we tell ourselves about our faith and our service, about the warrior religion, and what tropes do you see active that contribute to the kind of radicalization that you see especially within heathen veteran and military spaces? Like, what are the stories that are coming up?
You've really got the two sides of it, right? You've got the U.S. military tradition of being a service member story that is there, that is totally wrapped up in the American myth of patriotism, and you've got to serve to kind of prove that you are both a man or a woman, and that you deserve to be represented, within America. Having served in the military, there's a bit of that Starship Troopery sort of, you have to serve to become a citizen mentality that is in there, that's sort of baked in. At the same time, you've got this connection to Vikings as a warrior people, right? This complete myth. If you start looking at all of the various cultures around the world who have been assigned warrior peoplesdom, it really breaks down if you actually spend more than 15 minutes learning about those cultures, right? Sikhs are a great example of a culture that people will say they are a warrior culture, right? Sikhs are also incredibly communitarian and love helping and serving and feeding people as a thing. And I'm not an expert on Sikhism, but I see similarities in the way people view our heathenry as, they were Vikings, they were warriors, and it's like they were farmers and community people, right? That's really who they were as people.
I think you and I, and Piper, you and I have talked about this too. It's a topic that we talk about, reconstructing religion from what we have. If all we knew about Sikhs was the way they dressed and the weapons they had and the battles they fought, we wouldn't be able to understand. Who would guess that the religion of Sikhism is totally different than these badass warriors that you see in the mythology there, or the story, the history there, or also the samurai, right? The samurai of Japan. Who would guess that the religion was Zen Buddhism, right? And how would Zen Buddhism look if the only thing we knew about Zen Buddhism was that the samurais practiced it, right? We would think that basically it'd be like the Hagakure, and that's all that there is. we would never really understand Zen Buddhism. I just wanted to throw that to you, Piper. Like that was something we had talked about before.
Well, and the Zen Buddhism thing is interesting because there's a line in A Fish Called Wanda where Otto is like, meditating, and he said that's what the Zen Buddhists did before they went into battle. And it's very much that misinterpretation, misunderstanding of an entire culture based on a tiny sliver we're allowed to see of it.
Yes.
Actually. And I was actually, same with the Sikhs. I was incredibly impressed when we went to Parliament of World Religions, and service and hospitality were so deeply important to them. It was, I never would have known that these were the same people.
Yes.
Given what we see. Yeah.
Yes. And we don't, and just back to you, like, we don't really allow ourselves to be surprised in our media by, like, we don't see on the one hand, like Vikings, they go off into battle, whatever, and then they come home and it's peaceful and serene and like, the temples are so nice and everyone, there's no weapons allowed. Sorry, folks, no weapons allowed in holy spaces. That's like a fact. that you see across it's not just Norse paganism, but Germanic paganism in general, that weapons were prohibited to be in the sight of the gods. We don't allow ourselves to see that side, do we? In either popular media or in the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah. And it's hard because that attracts people too, right? To this idea of heathenry. I will admit, when I was a kid, when I first became a heathen, and I was a very scrawny kid, there was a element of this, this is a group of warriors who had this like strong like identity of being warriors, right? Did attract me initially. And there are many things that have kept me in heathenry. None of them are being a warrior, right? But it's certainly, when it is the first story you hear, it doesn't, that's not necessarily bad. But I think you need to be open to digging into it and realizing there's so much depth and power about being connected to the other people and the gods and all the other beings that we worship that I think is way more interesting than being a Viking warrior.
Yeah, and we were just to kind of maybe turn that to the dark side a little bit. So we were talking about radicalization and getting into antisocial groups. Mm-hmm. You clearly took a different route. What is it that you having that experience? What is it that you saw? You clearly said these warriors with their strong identities. Is that what you think is the pull for veterans when they're coming home? This idea of reintroduction to society, of what's the word, disorientation, the profound disorientation of coming home and not being the person you were, but everyone not realizing that you're not that person anymore, right? That profound disconnect and disorientation that I think we talked about with Ray at Troth Moot, this disconnect, this disorientation, and then you see this bold Viking warrior, axe in one hand, skull full of meat in the other, and there you go. Is that about right? Am I oversimplifying? You got it. You got to help me.
It's that, yes, and it's more, because the U.S. military in particular, I can only speak to the U.S. military. I haven't served in any other military to say, but I imagine it's very transferable. Does a very good job of making you feel like you are a part of something, right? You are an essential member of a small amount of the population, and you are told this over and over and over again. And you are, I'm going to say brainwashed, but it's not necessarily all bad, right? You are trained, you are molded to act when told to, right? I got laughed at very frequently by being the guy who asked why. That was not a thing that people in the military did, and I did. I encourage more military people to do so. There's nothing wrong with asking why. You should get a good answer from people. But sometimes you just have to act, right? And you're taught to act. You're taught to be there, but other people are always going to be there for you as well. There are people in the U.S. military who otherwise would never interact with one another, right? Would never support, protect, and defend one another. But the second they are together and they find reasons to support and love and care for each other, right? That doesn't exist in the same way in most of the United States today.
Right.
And when you leave that, and then you are told by these radical groups that atmosphere of connection and support and warriorness, you can continue having that because we are providing that to you, right? That is what these radical groups often do, is provide that sense of continuity of that thing that the U.S. military does so well. And I think inclusive heathenry can do that. We can build those communities where people feel connected and important and empowered. And as we do that, as we build those communities more and stronger, there will be less space for that radicalization to occur.
I picked up on one word and it's ringing in my head. I never thought to use this word when I think of the U.S. military. I don't know, Piper, if you picked on this up too. You used the word love when you talked about the bond that's built. That is not something I typically hear when people talk about their service in the military. About this bond of love created between comrades and colleagues. Like this is, and it's different than almost any other job I can think of, maybe except from working in a kitchen. But that bond of truly, it's something that veterans have told. They don't use the word love, but they always approach it without quite hitting it. Right. It's always getting there, but it doesn't quite get there. And like, how do you feel that we translate that feeling of love? Because it's a very interesting, this is getting to the philosophy here. It's an interesting kind of love that's very hard to translate into society. And how do you think, you said inclusive heathenry we can help here, and we can help, create the kinds of stories. How do we make people feel, but how do we make people feel loved in that sense?
Everybody has a purpose, right? I'm an existentialist. I'll even say I'm an absurdist and say the universe has no purpose for us, but we create our purpose, right? And I can laugh at everything because I can recognize that I am making up purpose constantly. But by giving and including and empowering people to purpose, they will keep doing that for other people, right? I think creating our inclusive heathen communities, as we connect with people and say, you have purpose, I need you, right? I need you to help me do this thing. I'm relying on you and you can rely on me. That can be as simple, and I've seen this with people, right? It's as simple as like, I'm going to help you move your house, right? Which isn't simple, right? Moving someone is a feat.
It's awful.
But it's a really good like community building thing, right? Going out and doing little bits of service for and with each other, right? Where you're like, hey, we're going to go work in a soup kitchen. I have a devotional Thorsman friend who he works in a food pantry. That is what he does. And I say work, he doesn't get paid for it, but he works a 40-hour job volunteering, doing this because he's like, this is what is important, right? He's creating that purpose.
Yeah.
It's that holy purpose, that holy work, right? That helps people. No, Totally. So the notion of that love being built from almost fulfilling a shared purpose together makes you feel that shared love together. And um, is there? I don't feel like I'm talking to a guru here. Hey, guru, is there a particular project? Maybe I'm going to ask this to you and Piper. Are there particular projects that you guys think this is the way, right? Like you were talking about the food pantry, like the way to serve people this way, or because there's equal amounts of project, like shared projects that someone could do, tearing people down, right? Or saying you're going to gear up and train this weekend for when the revolution comes, right? Like for when we're like, those are shared projects too. To either of you, is there some kind of moral? Do you guys feel like there's a moral distinction and a net, I don't know, positive that comes from doing things that are, for lack of a better word, benevolent versus malevolent?
I think most of my work with veterans is like on the spot things, like let's get together in a basement on 4th of July. I know that, as I said before, a lot of my family are military or veterans, including my father-in-law, and 4th of July is horrible for him. So let's do something that distracts you from that, right? Just the understanding, the reach out, the saying, I see you're having a problem. How can I help you? It's the start of any relationship. And of course, building purpose together is building relationship together, moving someone, or, having, this for Yule, we're writing to we're writing to In Reach prisoners for Happy Yule, those sorts of projects together. Those sorts of, when you come out, or when they come out, how can you feel understood? Right. And I think that building relationship is probably one of the best things that we can do to help anyone, frankly. But our veterans and our incarcerated population are the two populations where white supremacy radicalization gives them the purpose, it gives them a community, it gives them all the things that they don't get when they come back as different people, because they really do come back as different people.
Yeah. And what you notice, if you are a person who tracks the way these white supremacist cults build, is they give people jobs to do, right? Yeah. It's almost like the mafia, right? The stereotypical media mafia, where they're like, I'm going to give you a little job to do, and that becomes right. But that's how they get people, right? Is they truly say, we have a purpose for you. We are going to get you to do a thing. We can build these projects. I think these projects can be as benevolent and amazing as going out and doing service projects, right? Go and feed the homeless for a day. Go and volunteer your time at an animal sanctuary with people, right? Or just go and hang out and play games. I'm a big advocate for that, right? I think it's an amazing thing. But also have a potluck. Rely on one another. Find a way to rely on one another in all of the community building activities you do. That even when someone doesn't live up to it, you can be like, oh, awesome. Hey, I'm so glad you brought these cups this time. Hey, next time, can you bring X, Y, and Z? Because I know people will like whatever, right? Give the people you interact with a goal, a purpose, a focus. People will run with it.
Yeah. And do you find that in the veterans experience, in that homecoming experience, the purposelessness of life, of as you said, you're in the military, not just everything you have the orders, but everything you do has a purpose. Every activity has a significant. It's part of fulfilling a mission. It's part of fulfilling a like, you might not know what the overall plan is unless you ask why enough, but like, you might not know what that overall plan is, but okay, my standing here for this amount of time is a vital part of this mission, right? Whereas when you get back home, all right, I guess I'll go to work, right? Okay, I guess I'll go. I guess I'll go sit at the VFW for a little while. Wait to see who shows up, right? Like, it's not. It doesn't have that same cadence, that same rhythm, that same purpose written into every single minute of your life, right?
And you have to make your own purpose, right, in that space instead of it being given to you. And that's hard. Making up a purpose in a world where purpose is hard to figure out it's easy to get lost in that, right? It's why you see slingshot people getting out and then coming back in the military, right? You see a lot of that. It happens way more than people give it credit for, right?
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who I could not, like, when he talked about the military. So he went in, you might, Josh, I think we're similar ages, so we have similar experiences here. Like, my friends all signed up, not all of them, but like a lot of them signed up just after 9/11. Like, they wanted to go, right? And when they got back, one of them got back in like 2005. And he could not say enough terrible things about his experience. But then like 3 months later, he's like, I got to go back. There's nothing. He's like, there's nothing for me here. I got to go back. And I'm like, but my dude, like, you were crying in your beer the other day about like the terrible things that you said you did and that you had to do and that you had to witness. And he's like, I don't care. There's nothing for me here. Right. Is that in general sort of the feeling that you think, or just very common for slingshotters, or just common veterans experience overall?
Totally common, because you often, and this isn't for everybody, but everybody joins the military for a reason. And for many people, that reason is life sucks. Like, I need to change this, right? There was a phrase that I pulled out of a book about changing your luck, right? And the military is an amazing way to change your luck. It is a way to completely change who and what you are. And your trajectory of life becomes something completely different, right? And having that, right, experiencing that, and then going back to what you had before, if you don't have a plan, you will immediately get either lost back in where you were before, where you're like, there's no purpose, there's nothing here, what am I doing? And that becomes soul destroying for people, particularly because there's a sense of there's no end in a lot of people's mentalities today about their oath of service ending, right?
Yes.
And it does. This is a thing that I've been really trying to encourage military people to think about. It's like, ending an oath is a holy, amazing, wonderful experience. And it should be as cool of an experience as you putting your hand up for that oath initially, right? There should be a ritual, right? Or something to acknowledge your oath is over and you are back being the regular person.
There's something really to be said for that, where people feel the weight of that oath their whole lives, right? Piper, maybe you have something. You said you have lots of veterans in your family. They feel that weight their whole life.
Yes.
And it never gets a release. And that's something, sadly, that our society doesn't, you get your discharge letter, and then it's like, okay, there you go. Now you're back on a plane and you're back in the United States, and there you are. But there's there doesn't seem to be that kind of finale of experience as it was when it came in, right?
And it's like you're stuck in this liminal space between I am a soldier, I have a purpose, I have things that people count on me for, right? Because a lot
Yes.
of people, at least in my experience, that become soldiers are people that really do honestly want to make the world a better place.
Yep.
Right? They have been, you know, how that feeds into the American mythology is a whole nother conversation, but that's what they're doing, right? They want to make the world a better place. And so when they come back, and yes, they have a discharge letter, but they haven't really been sort of accepted back into civilian society. So they're in this liminal space of what do I do? What do I do? Who am I? Where do I fit? And they're different people. And, you know, if someone's not having that conversation with them in a very personal, direct way, they're stuck. And and if you're stuck in a liminal space, I mean, how can you make relationships? How can you make connections? You're not anywhere. You're stuck. So
that's what it means to fall through a crack, right?
Yeah. Fall through a crack.
You fall through a crack into liminal space and you never come back. Yeah. Or it's hard to get out. Yeah. Once you're there. But Josh, I want to continue on this idea of how do we ritualize, how do we sacralize the transition? And we had been talking just before the show about the gods and how many of the gods, you know, people are drawn to the Norse gods because they're war gods, right? They're you know, we have Odin, who's a war god, you have Thor, who's a war god, and Freya, who's a war god, and everybody's a war god. And what it almost feels like that's what people get drawn to, that part of the mythology, but there's another side to it, isn't there? Absolutely.
It's funny. I am an advocate for deportfolioizing the gods, right? A portfolio is a thing from Dungeons and Dragons where each of the gods in the Dungeons and Dragons world had a thing that they did, right?
And I don't think that that's unintentional in our community. I think that might very well go hand in hand.
Yes, yeah. I think so
this
too.
Community specifically.
But it's one of those things that when you actually look at polytheistic faiths around the world, except for the Romans and the Greeks, right? The Romans and the Greeks did have this bit of a portfolio, a god of X, right? Mm-hmm. Most polytheistic peoples around the world didn't have that, right? Maybe like a god had a thing that that was a thing in their story, right? And Odin has things in his story, right? Where, yes, he has gone to war, but many men in that society would have gone to war, right? That doesn't mean he's a war god. Odin is probably a war god, but like they aren't necessarily anything other than these are elements of their story, of their experience. I am not a warrior because I was in the army. Trust me, I'm not a warrior, but that is an element of my story that someone could look at me and go, I'm going to go and talk to Josh about war stuff. And I'm going to say, well, my experience may not be what you're looking for, right? That idea, though, is that we are a warrior religion is a enticing thing for military people, right? And or people who are destined to go into the military tend to come to heathenry and say, oh yeah, I see lots of warrior culture stuff here, and that leads me into the military because that's a natural outgrowth, right?
Yeah.
I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, depending on how we define warrior and depending on how we define everything else around it. And that can get into either unhealthy or healthy spaces, right? Where if we say service is important, that is healthy. That is a really good thing where we're saying, yes, service to your country, to the people around you, to the places and people that you are responsible to is really awesome. The gods believe totally in service to each other and to the people who worship them, right? Sometimes for good or bad. but is it war or is it service, right? And if it's war, why? What's the purpose of war?
I don't know. I'm just now blanking and thinking of that song, War, what is it good for? And then the answer is absolutely nothing. But no, it's an important thing. And I also love the idea of like, yeah, if you have these gods who have warrior as part of their story, but Odin equally has poet as part of his story. Equally has wizard as part of his story. Also has wandering guy as just kind of knocking on doors, seeing who's home. Part of his story. I don't know what kind of job that would be. Vagrant. He was part of that. Part of that on his story is part of that's part of his story. But like the deities are multifaceted. The stories are multifaceted, and we have to allow them to be multifaceted. Mm-hmm. In order to live that kind of fuller experience rather than limiting everything into war. Yeah, and trying to interpret our lives in terms of war, because go to a Reddit or don't save your sanity. Go to a heathen Reddit or a Norse pagan Reddit, and just look for all the people who are wondering how to get to Valhalla.
Yep.
And talking about like all the different things that could be war, right? Like, oh, what if depression is a war? What if cancer is a war? What if all this? What if paying my bills is a war? Like, it's this attempt to understand your whole life through this metaphor of war and conflict, and it just doesn't seem to me to be I don't think that's the right way to go.
Yeah. I completely agree, because what is the whole story telling us, right? And I think when we look at storytelling as a multifaceted thing, storytelling does multiple things, right? It teaches us about ourselves. It teaches us about things we could do, might want to do, are capable of. But stories can change. We can change stories intentionally. And we can look at stories differently and say, wait, this story is actually telling me something different now than it did last week. It's why it's always good to revisit stories, right? It's good to go back to the myths and say, what am I learning from this now? Mm-hmm. Because you're always going to pull new knowledge out of old knowledge if you spend time with it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I actually wanted to talk to you about was we had talked during our, when we were sort of brainstorming an idea of what it might look like to have a heathen veterans program, and the metaphor that we come up with was Noatun, right? Or Noatun, the boat, the ship of peace, and the idea that of coming home on a ship. And it's over now, and it's time to transition on that ship from war into an earned peace that you have earned that through your service. You have earned your rest, you've earned your peace, and you can celebrate that. And the god we talked about, which is a god not to, like, most people completely ignore this god. But I think actually our discussion made me look into him more, is Njörd.
Yeah.
Is the god of peace, and reading more of the stories involving him, like that he had really nice feet.
Mm-hmm. Very pretty feet.
But it got me thinking, like, why it made me think, and maybe you guys we dig into this story a little bit, like maybe thinking, why does he have the nicest feet? And would it be something, or am I missing an inside joke, right? That the audience understands that he would be the one with the nicest feet and not someone else. Like, there's a joke here that I'm not getting, that the audience would know, of course Njörd has the nicest feet, and it's because he, sits on a beach all day and chills and is peaceful and doesn't do anything. Just kind of chills and is at ease, or he's in the water and just being a peaceful guy, walking on air, just enjoying life. That's why he's got such nice feet. whereas everyone else is like tilling soil and fighting battles. And I don't know if anyone's seen soldiers' feet, but they're not like super pretty feet.
Yeah, usually
No,
no.
they're not. They are not.
You know, because Balder, it was like, oh yes, it's Balder. He must have the nice. But Balder is a warrior, right?
Yeah.
He probably does not have. I cannot believe we're sitting here talking about God feet.
I mean, he's probably got athlete's foot like the rest of the,
Yeah.
Oh,
They're like staring off into the space, like what have I done with my life? Talk about feet, everybody. But I felt like it was something revisiting the mythology again, starting to see things I hadn't seen before, where there felt like there was this inside joke about Njörd, about this story, where it's like, yes, of course he would be the one with the nice feet, and everyone would know that hearing the story. But then you get the reveal at the end, which is the comedy, where it's like, oh, she thought she was getting Balder, but she actually got Njörd. Oh no. That kind of thing. And then there's the other one in the Locusena where where it's a little bit more vulgar, where it's saying like, oh, Njörd, you're such a pacifist that when the giantess captured you, they peed on you and you let them do it, right? Like but again, that's a reference to something about his pacifism, right? It's an exaggeration, right?
Mm-hmm.
So looking at these, I don't know, is there other stories that you guys have looked at, come back to, and said like, well, this is actually a little more interesting now that I look at it this way in terms of like peace?
I want to say your dissection of Njörd was spot on in lots of different ways. He has beautiful feet because the ocean does wash them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, if you're spending time in that liminal space between the water and the sand, your feet are going to be scrubbed and washed constantly by those two things, right? I am a person who loves being by the ocean, and when you said that, it made me feel a deeper connection there than I had previously made, in a way that I think is really powerful. And so thank you. Even if you think it was a total random thing to go into, it was very valuable to me. So I appreciate it.
Just sitting here talking about feet. Well, also I thought it had to do with labor as well. Like,
yes,
he has nice. He doesn't work. He doesn't have to. Like,
he's not marching for miles and miles and miles in boots either.
He's chilling. The food's coming to him. Like, everything's good, and that's why people. I'm like, oh, so that's why people pray to Njörd, because it's like, yeah, I want to have it good too. Like, I want some of that sweet life, right?
Yeah.
I want to have nice feet. I also miss the ocean too, Josh. Like that was a big part of my growing up, and yeah.
It's funny. You got me thinking about Heimdall, Hama, who the first god I worshipped, and like definitely still high up on that list for me. But people focus a lot on two totally disparate elements of his stories, right? Him being out in the world and him being in Asgard at Bifrost, right? There's a reason he's like, I'm done doing that, right? I'm done traveling and going everywhere. I want to be home, and I want to be safe, and I want to keep everybody else safe, right? And he does represent that veteran who has experience, knows the dangers of the outside world, is keeping an eye on them. But you also, when you read stories about him, he's not unhappy, right? He's not disconnected. He is incredibly entwined in everything that is happening around him, partly because he can see and hear everything, but also because people keep him involved and connected. And I think that is a good lesson for those heathen veterans that are like, I still have this hypervigilance thing going on. Cool, bud. Put that to use. Put that to purpose. people need that. People need that sort of support and security, but don't disconnect yourself while you are being that guard dog, right?
Yeah, and I also think that, and this gets into the topic that we had, Piper, you had brought up before about the kinds of stories we look into when we look at the gods. We tend to emphasize sort of the guardian, the stalwart, the man. these sorts of these images of toxic masculinity, right? And violence that permeate popular conceptions of Norse mythology. How do we challenge those, and how are those stories, embedded, perpetuating that kind of violence? How do we disentangle them?
Wow, that is. I wish I had the answer to that. I'd sell it. But I do.
Well, now you got to give it away.
Yeah, now I have to give it away. I think that much like it's interesting because the stories we get today of the Vikings and the gods are very similar to the stories we get of the military today, and they're both bad. They're both incredibly, they flatten the actual kinds of, deity we could be involved with. And, usually men, but not always, service members that we could be involved with, right? They're taught this very toxic thing in both of those. And the biggest, and they come home with, or they may have had this before they go, because I know plenty of heathen masculine presenting people who do this as well, that aren't veterans, that the warrior religion leaves out home. There is no home for warriors. You have no home. You're out there, you're wandering, you're fighting wars, and you come back, then there is no home for you. And that poisons their relationships with their families, with their partners, with their caregivers if they come back profoundly disabled. It creates a kind of bitterness and toxic masculinity, in that hyper masculine, I have to be alert all the time. I have to be causing pain all the time. Or, oh gods, the Jordan Peterson, Andrew Tate produce, procreate and protect. And it
room buckle.
Yeah. And that cripples them, but it also makes all of the contributions of the people around them that are supporting them useless, pointless. I mean, if you come at me super hyper masculine, I'm going to go, wow, you need to go elsewhere. Because I'm too old to deal with that now.
And I also think, John, to tie this back to what we were talking about before, like maybe how we shift this from that kind of toxic toxic aspect of like, it's wanting, it's almost like you want the box but not the present that comes in it, or something like that. Like it's the violence, the pain, the stress, this is what it really is. The present that's in there is you're asking for love. You're asking for love and connection, and we're not equipping, especially I would definitely say for male presenting, but I would probably even say female presenting veterans. We're not presenting. I mean, if I think about Ashley Babbitt, for example, like you can find people who wanted that love and purpose, that love in purpose, and never found it here because for one reason or another, that temptation of it was the violence, it was the thrill, because it can be thrilling, it can also be super boring. Like it can be, it's so as one person in the military describes to me, it is periods of extreme boredom followed by several periods of like the most stress you've ever felt in your life, followed once again by extreme boredom.
Yeah.
Like that he's like, that was me for 5 years. that was my life. But that's, they look, the thrill, the action, that's going to produce that love, that connection that I felt. And then also the feeling of importance, of centeredness, of feeling like, I think you and I talked, Josh, at Troth Moot, about the feeling of being in your old room.
Yeah.
After having commanded, I commanded a battalion of men, and here I am looking at my corn poster from, back when I used to listen to that, and I'm sitting on a bed that doesn't really fit me anymore, looking at bed sheets that I haven't slept, like I'm not this, whoever this person was, it's not me. And my parents are asking me, so what do you want to do today, son? And I'm just thinking, I don't know what to do with you people, because am I doing that hands right? I
Yes.
don't I used to command people every day to tell them, okay, you need to go over here and you need to shoot this and you need to blow that up and you need to stand here.
Mhm.
I was important. I was someone who was part of something, and now I'm just kind of your son sitting in his room, looking at my corn poster.
Yeah.
I think there are two books that I've read recently, For the Love of Men by Liz Plank, and a book by Bell Hooks on the same subject of masculinity, right? And they both come to this really similar conclusions that that men are taught not to need or want love, right? They are reinforced over and over again. I apologize if those sirens are coming through.
They got you, Josh. They got you. Got a man here talking about toxic masculinity.
Talking about love. I'm going to get arrested.
Love.
Love is the essential thing that's broken down. That produces toxic masculinity, right? If you look at the Old Norse sagas in particular, when things really explode is when a man either misconstrues love or feels so much love for a member of their family who is harmed for one reason or another, and then loses it because of that like over connection to it, right?
Yes.
Today's toxic masculinity is very similar, where we've created a space where men cannot feel love and feel being loved without feeling embarrassed or disconnected or scared of it, right? It's why you don't hear the word love used by military people, because they don't know how to use that word anymore. But any service member walking into any service will be told at one point by someone, usually a man, I am now your mom and your dad. Because the idea of family and love is a central element of the way the military crafts people, right? I think we just need to recapture that and say that love of the people in your community is just as essential as any other emotion that you've been taught to feel. Yeah,
that is extremely profound. And I also think about just naming it, that feeling of, a lot of veterans I've been to a lot of VFWs mostly to watch pro wrestling, but that's my life. That's my struggle. And that's when I go into like VFWs when it's not pro wrestling night, you feel this kind of like, oh, hey, how are you? Like it is a kind of love that doesn't want to talk about itself ever. You feel this sense of they talk to one another, they understand, they share these stories, and it is that sense of love, either between people who served in the same conflict or they served in different ones, and it almost feels like a father meeting a son or something like that, or a brother meeting a sister. But they don't. It's not that. That's not how they describe it. Like, and they don't want to, right? It just simply permeates the air. And you almost, and if you're not a veteran, you almost feel uncomfortable because you're like, oh, I walked.
Should I leave?
This isn't where I parked my car. They're not going to tell you to go. Right?
Are you guys going to kiss, or is this tension just going to continue?
It's two guys like just really connecting, but they're not looking at each other, just both staring at their beer, and they're both crying, but not towards each other. Right? They're just looking straight ahead. And it's a truly profound moment. But Josh, you named it in the beginning. We've been talking about this whole time. It's that love through purpose, and that's we've solved it, guys. That's how we do it. We just have to craft love through purpose and rituals that. And Josh, if we just have a little bit of time left. We've hit 9 o'clock. I want to be respectful for everyone's time, but I do want us to, and especially you, to help us imagine what it would be like for a veteran coming home. In that Noatuan sense, like having that feeling of the weight of the burden of the oath lifted and turned into, transformed, transmuted into peace.
I think the ritual's got to have a couple of components, right? There has to be a public acknowledgement that someone has upheld their oath, right? Public could be two people, it could be a whole community of people, right? But there needs to be an acknowledgement that you have done it, right? When someone wins a race, you give them a trophy, you stand them up on a thing, and you say you did it, right? That is the first thing, an acknowledgement, the oath is over, right? And that there has to be some form of then cleansing of the miasma of war and warriorhood, right? A sense that you are in Heathen era, right? Like someone that joined a war band was considered dead, right? And because they were in the war band, they were already considered dead. When they left the war band, they were ritually cleansed and reborn, right? A very simple application of clean water. We'll steal from Jesus on this. Washing someone's feet is not weird in this context, right? A little bit of hand washing, water on the head would be huge, right? It's a small, simple ritual that says you are being cleansed. We don't have a big enough cauldron to fit someone in whole body and scrub them down, but if we did, we could do that too.
Or
right?
I mean, I just my mind, since I'm in Minnesota, and Piper, you're probably thinking this too, the sauna and cold plunge. The idea of sitting there, sauna can be a really spiritual experience if you're sitting there with the right combination of herbs. Not going to say which kind, but if you're sitting in there with the right atmosphere, the right vibe, you can start feeling that sense of rebirth, and then you jump out into an ice cold lake, and you're reborn. Then I mean, it doesn't necessarily just have to be. I mean, the washing the feet is an incredibly humbling experience for the person doing it, right? The person and for the person receiving it, it is an honor, right? It would be an honor to have that done, and it's sacralizing it in a way that shows that respect and that honor. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Make your feet like Njörd's feet.
Exactly. There you go.
Yes. Make your
sauna, pedicure, and a jump in a cold tub, and you're.
And that's a good graduation, right? Mm-hmm. But then you've got to make sure that you're continuing to keep that person engaged.
Yes.
And said, we have honored your service. Your oath is over. We recognize that is a big headspace. And then we are going to keep working with you, and we'll keep you involved and make sure you feel like you matter.
Yeah. Because you do.
Yep.
Yes, you do.
And any veterans out there, you do matter. Absolutely.
Very much. You matter.
Josh, I have loved spending the evening with you. Piper, you know, I even if we weren't doing a show, I would love to be hanging with you guys. These guys are so great. And I appreciate Josh. I appreciate your service, both in military and in peacetime, and all the work that you've been doing. And I just want to say, do you guys have any parting thoughts, parting words, plugs, pluggables? Also follow Josh Heath on TikTok.
Yes.
He is low key, and I say low key, one of the best Heathen TikTokers. Zero drama. Sorry, folks. Zero drama that you're going to get from at Heathen Philosopher, correct?
That's right. Which people should check out. I enjoy doing them. So,
and I definitely check out Heathen Philosopher, because I am not a philosopher and I get a lot out of them.
Yes.
So I very much appreciate that you do those and offer those for the community.
Yes, thank you guys so much for all the time tonight. And John, I don't necessarily want to steal your line, but I'm going to steal your line. Let's keep going. You know, let's think, folks. Have a good night.